We're talking about the Domino DF 500 today. This is a workhorse, and I love it in the shop for building furniture, especially, and using those floating tenons to joint things together. I use this thing on almost every project because I do build a lot of furniture. So today is not an overview of the Festool Domino. There's a lot of really good videos for that. I'm just going to share with you some tips and ideas in case you're new to this thing and you're like, haven't thought through these different elements, or you just haven't had these experiences in the shop yet because you haven't used it that much. So the first thing we're going to talk about is I would suggest you get a bunch of cutter heads, a bunch meaning like one or two extras, so that in the middle of your work, in case the tip breaks, you can replace this cutter head pretty quickly and get right back to work. It really doesn't work once that carbide tip breaks at all, so it's not like you can keep shoving it in there. It's not like if your blades or knives or whatever get a little bit dull, it'll still kind of keep working on like a planer or a table saw. This thing just won't work if that carbide tip breaks. So having one of these on hand will help a lot. I also suggest you get a quality, authentic Festool cutter head for that. You can find generic cutter heads online. I've just found that these ones cut better and they last a little bit longer than those generic ones. Something that goes hand in hand with that you might not realize when you get this, because this kind of has the look of a biscuit jointer, and you might see it as like its ugly cousin and be like, I can use this the exact same way. Be careful with that. There's a couple things that make it distinct, and one of them will especially get frustrating if you try to use this like a biscuit joiner, where you can just shove that spinning blade into some stock to create the pocket for those biscuits. You're going to have problems because these blades are oscillating and you need to go a little bit more slowly with it. So don't try to shove it in there. I've had a couple tips break because I think I was going too hard to begin with in some really hard wood, and you're out $50 because you've just lost your tip. So take your time slowly plunging that in there and you're going to have no problem. Make sure you also have with that good dust extraction. It has a really good dust port and it pulls out the chips really well, but using that dust port is going to help so that there's not a whole bunch of stuff in there and it takes longer and gets gunked up, all that kind of stuff. So don't treat it like a biscuit joiner and you'll be good to go. And while I'm on the topic of cutter heads, one of the things that I do that is probably controversial and people are probably going to be like, what in the world are you doing? Is I really stick with one cutting head size for 90% of my projects. So for the most part, I use the 5mm width bit. It tends to work really well. I don't have any issues. It works for almost every scenario I have. And I can always then have the cutter head backup that I need so that I can switch it out in case what I just talked about happens. By using the single domino cutting size, I can also get the dominoes in bulk. These loose tenons are pretty expensive. I get these ones from Tay Tools. They're beech tenons. They're not quite the same as the domino loose tenons, but they work just as well. I've used these on many projects. They glue up well. They hold things together nicely. So I save a little bit of money there, and I buy them in bulk so that way they're always around and I won't run out mid-project. Now, one reason you might have bought your domino is for things like gluing up panels or putting face frames on furniture. That's why I bought it, and it's been absolutely helpful in both of those situations. The tip I'd give you there is don't rely on the tightest setting on the domino where it's only the width of each domino. Instead, use that middle or rightmost setting where you get extra width for that that pocket, because in doing so it allows you to adjust your panel in case you need to adjust it left or right for whatever reason. If you do it exactly the width of the domino, it's going to hold there. You're not going to be able to adjust that at all, which is the point of a tenon, right? So that you don't have it wiggling. But oftentimes with that panel glue up, you're going to want that to wiggle a little bit. Same with that face frame. Because you might be dealing with some miters on the edges, you might want to be adjusting that ever so slightly left or right if that's a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch. So using those wider settings are really helpful to give you some maneuverability after you've done all the work to plunge in the mortises, and you don't want to have to do that again. That said, that tight setting's really helpful if you are making something more precise and you need to have like legs line up and have that really strong joint. You don't want to have that loose tenon then in that situation. So it depends, of course, on the application, but I noticed with face frames especially, my initial instinct was, oh, I should have that really tight and make sure that's a certain width, but actually having that wider width helps out a lot more in making sure that you can adjust things ever so slightly when needed, because frankly, that's sometimes part of the whole gig. There's some other really cool accessories for this that I'm not going to show today because that's kind of extra from what you initially have here. If this content's interesting, I can certainly do a couple videos on the accessories that I might get for this. Of course, the main thing you're going to need is some kind of dust extraction. Otherwise, it's pretty good to go once you have it. And I think once you own it, you're going to realize you use it pretty frequently if you're building furniture. So I would get it if you haven't get it and you're on the fence right now. If you have it, enjoy. You're just going to have to ignore those parts of the videos where everybody's talking about how you can just do everything with dowels or biscuits or whatever. So welcome to the club. This is it. I do not have a DF 700, so maybe one day.